This is Minecraft. I know you know it. It's the pixelated Lego game with nothing challenging, right? Wrong. What lies before your eyes is the most brutal, competitive, and technical game that I know of. I want to master it. Now, I've already honed my skills in parkour and related movement fields, but in order to become the best Minecraft player in the world, I'll have to master combat. To do so, I plan to train for 100 days in the latest version of PvP. By the way, when the average YouTuber says that they did something in Minecraft for 100 days, they're usually talking about 10 to 20 minute long Minecraft days. When I say I did something in Minecraft for 100 days, I'm talking about months on end of spending multiple hours each day just practicing for a video. On the first day though, I didn't spend any time practicing. I would much rather make plans than throw myself straight into the Coliseum, thank you very much. I decided that I would start by practicing with a bow and crossbow, then move on to sword, then axe and shield, and finally crystal PvP, moving on only after achieving mastery of each discipline. Keep in mind that I know nothing about PvP at this point, besides from some bed wars and my researching different game modes, hence why I spent the second half of day 1 looking for general PvP tutorials online. I thought it was perfectly reasonable to expect to be world class in 4 unique combat systems after a mere 25 days of practice each, but after starting day 2 with 2 matches of Crystal to get a feel for the game mode, I realized just how hard of a challenge this was going to be. I can't just watch some tutorials and then expect to have the muscle memory to perform a complex series of keystrokes successfully against experienced players. I need to build practice setups first and start taking my practice seriously, otherwise I'm not going to survive out there. I spent days 3 through 8 rewatching the tutorials I had found, taking notes this time, and playing many matches of bow PvP. As you might expect, my aim wasn't great, so I built a target range first, but the stationary targets didn't help with my need to hit a moving object after just a quick glance. So I made a bat summoner using command blocks, but the bats were tiny and didn't move in a predictable way like players do, so I got frustrated and didn't end up using either setup for much longer than they took to build. I did find out though that bows have some built-in randomness when it comes to where their arrows land, meaning long-range shots on small targets are sometimes just as much luck as skill, which is useful information to have. After seeing the failure of my aim setups, I went back to practicing bow and crossbow PvP against players, but as it turns out, it's not a very popular game mode, so it took a long time to get into a match with another player. On days 9 and 10, then I started mixing in games of sword PvP, because it was right next to the bow area, when players were available, and on day 11 I actually only did sword PvP. I spent days 12 through 16 practicing a mixture of sword and axe duels, so yeah, my initial plan was pretty far out the window at this point. I also did a bit of bedrock PvP with my friends who only play Minecraft Bedrock. I actually did bedrock PvP with friends throughout the 100 days, but I didn't write it down most of the time because my goal was to master Java PvP, which uses an entirely different system. I do think that playing a bit of bedrock helped me with my aim though, so it wasn't all time wasted. When it comes to Java Edition though, I'm going to have some frankly epic duels before we're done, so make sure to watch to the end. I also tried out Nethpot, or Netherite Potion combat on day 19, and I felt like I was decent at it, which was honestly quite a weird feeling. Days 20 through 23, I kept practicing for a couple hours each day, mostly doing axe and starting on crystals, with a bit of Nethpot mixed in, and minimal sword practice at this point. I hadn't done any crystal games since day 2, and surprise, I hadn't gotten any better. In fact, I was terrible at the game mode, and I would come to find out that Crystal PvP is one of the most demanding game modes when it comes to knowledge of Minecraft mechanics and muscle memory for combos. So I found a tutorial specific to Crystal PvP on YouTube, and once again watched it a few times and took notes. I'd actually come back to the tutorials I had found for various game modes whenever I felt like I was doing poorly in them, and this usually helped remind me of the game's key mechanics, oddly enough. There's no shame in watching tutorials for something you want to improve at, and even if you feel like you already have it down, that's even more reason to make sure you actually know your theory. Anyway, the crystal tutorial recommended that I practice hit crystals on a zombie before trying them on players who have an annoying tendency to avoid dying. So I started day 24 off by summoning a zombie with resistance and practicing the most basic of the crystal combos, the hit crystal, which consists of attacking the zombie and, while it's rising from your knockback, placing both an obsidian and an end crystal, then breaking the crystal when the zombie reaches its highest point in the air. Altogether at normal speed, it looks something like this. You might be wondering why anyone would spend hours practicing this combo when you could just make an explosion without hitting the player or zombie first, and, well, you can, but compare the damage with me standing to me jumping first to simulate knockback. Yeah, you might find this odd since in the first example my head is right next to the explosion, and in the second my feet are next to it. But remember, this is Minecraft, and Steve's vital organs are all in his legs, or something like that. In reality, this is because Minecraft calculates explosion damage by casting rays out from the explosion and counting how many intersect your player's lower hitbox. If there's a block between your feet and your explosion, then you'll be protected, but you'll be exposed if you get knocked upward first. And yes, you heard me correctly when I said this was the most basic of the crystal combos, but I won't bore you explaining the intricacies of all the other combos, especially since they mostly build off the hit crystal. I spent days 25 and 26 practicing on this zombie a lot, but kept doing some axe, sword, and Nethwa matches to make sure I didn't get rusty in either game mode. Also, I haven't talked much about how long I'm practicing at this point, but I was putting in a good 3 or more hours each day, and I felt like I was finally getting into the groove of this challenge. At the beginning, I definitely wasn't this invested. And okay, to be fair, I did lose this groove on days 27 and 28 when I did less than an hour total of mixed axe and crystal matches, but I did resume practicing for a couple hours a day over the next 5 days, where I kept focusing on crystal and a bit of axe. Crystal PvP is definitely very unintuitive, but I felt like I was starting to see some progress after all my hit crystal practice. I also noticed on day 34 that over a month of recording hours of PvP each day had filled up my storage, so I transferred some of the footage to a USB stick and decided not to record as much for the rest of the challenge unless I was in some sort of special match. And believe me, there are going to be some very special matches before we're done with this. I spent the next days refocusing on axe. At this point, the repetition of doing the same thing for over a month started to get to me, so I took a probably unintentional 2-week break with a day of crystal in the middle, and I did feel more refreshed after that. I spent day 43 practicing sword duels again, since I hadn't done those in a while. One of my fights came down to 1 hit, which was simultaneously very intense and very fun, and I think it would have been fun even if I hadn't won. Those are the best kinds of duels. I kept practicing sword combat between days 44 and 48, of course with axe duels on the side. I saw this one video of a guy who mastered PvP in 5 days, which left me contemplating my choices. But I soon recovered and decided to use it as an opportunity for character growth and plot development. So of course I noted the server he used to practice, which was called Stray, and tried to join it, but it was under maintenance and stayed that way for a while. But that was only a slight inconvenience because I could keep using PvP Legacy to practice in the meantime. I also tried joining a few group games with Sharpness, a YouTuber who contributed to one of the PvP tutorials, and gave tips to the guy in the last video I mentioned. But those games were more chaotic than my usual practice, which seems to be the case for most large Minecraft battles, which I decided I don't like as much. Of course, right after this I got hooked on PvP Legacy's FFA game mode, which stands for Free For All, by the way, and that's basically just a large Minecraft battle. I guess an uninterrupted series of 1v1s is a bit different, but either way it was pretty addicting because I spent pretty much all of days 49 through 52 playing it, although I did do some OP on day 52, which helped me realize that I need to practice spacing. So on day 53, I copied my hit crystal practice setup and repurposed it to help me train the spacing necessary for his sword combos, as well as punish crits, which had just been a theoretical strategy for me until this point. I also went back and reviewed an advanced axe tutorial I had watched, and by the end of the day I felt pretty confident in both sword and axe PvP. However, I thought this was actually day 86, and was getting nervous about not being proficient in crystal before the end of the 100 days. Why did I think this was day 86, you may ask?
Who gave you permission to speak?
In reality, I was too lazy to count how many dates I had listed in my notes, so I asked ChatGPT to do it for me. But for some reason, ChatGPT decided not to be able to count that day, and told me there were 86 days. This was one of the reasons I didn't stick with my original plan. The other reason was that it was a terrible plan. Feeling the need to round out my skills, I practiced mainly crystal and sword duels for the next 5 days, mixing in a fair bit of axe as well. I met a guy named ArchibaldCM who offered to train me after I asked for tips on day 56 because I saw he was so good, but our schedules never worked out. I realize now that he blew up on YouTube right after I fought him, which explains why he seemed so busy. But don't worry, I'm going to have several more opportunities to fight some truly world-class players. First though, I took a bit over a week off between days 57 and 58 for my real-life commitments, and come on, don't be so surprised that I have any. Days 58 through 65 I spent practicing more sword PvP than usual, and I did some of it on Stray. I learned about something called jump canceling on day 62, where you jump the frame you get hit to reduce knockback, and I tried it occasionally, but never really got it down to the point that it was useful. Also, Stray had finally opened by day 65. Apparently that server only has sword PvP, but everyone on it is really good, and I would end up meeting some of the best PvPers I would see on that server. Also, from now on, when I say I practiced sword PvP, I'll sometimes be on Stray and sometimes on PvP Legacy, which is what I have been using. There's not much of a difference gameplay-wise other than skill level. I spent day 66 practicing a mix of all 3 main game modes, but unfortunately had to stop because of persistent lag. Then spent 4 days straight practicing only my zombie crystal combos. I'm not entirely sure why, to be honest. This might have been the point where I discovered I could listen to a podcast while fighting the zombie, but either way, having several extra hours worth of muscle memory certainly didn't hurt my crystal combat statistics. I then got distracted by starting a guild on Windcraft for over a month? I guess this was never a consecutive 100 days, but wow. I did also discover a new server called MCCI over this break, and they have some fun PvP games, but I don't really see them contributing to my skills. They also have a Parkour Warrior game mode now, which makes part of my last video seem weirdly unnecessary, but it wasn't too hard for me to win a few rounds because of my previous training. Also, a fun fact, one of these rounds included Dream, who got 2nd place, but I certainly wasn't the one in first. When I got back to Stray on day 71, I got to fight a few rounds against a guy who was pretty evenly matched with me. These kinds of duels are nice because you aren't getting destroyed, but you still have to think and focus on the match, which I feel is one of the best ways to improve. Anyway, I received an invite from this guy to a mostly sword-focused PvP group. It seemed that the best PvPer in this group was someone who we'll call Elmo, and this gave me a new goal: kill Elmo. If I actually wanted to do this, I'd have to get pretty good at sword PvP, so I practiced it exclusively for the next 7 days. My aim wasn't great, so I tried decreasing my FOV to make the players on the screen bigger, and that actually helped a surprising amount. I also did a bit of PvP with speed to train my aim, but it was kind of infuriatingly difficult. On day 72, I fought the best player I would see in this challenge, who was of course a guy named Stinky Fart 1 with the Saitama skin. I would later learn that he's a tier 2 PvPer, which essentially means that he is world class and wins over 90% of his duels. You might have been able to guess that I didn't win, but his sheer skill was definitely inspiring. Then rewatched the tutorial for sword PvP and analyzed some high tier sword gameplay, plus I heard one person say that having good aim is the key to not getting comboed, which sounded unintuitive, but did seem to help, along with my study. I fought one super laggy player on day 78, which should have been an easy fight, but left me struggling. Your muscle memory just vanishes as soon as your opponent's knockback is delayed by more than a second. I realized the next day that I would have to practice game modes other than just sword PvP if I wanted to actually stand a chance of mastering PvP overall. So I watched the Axe and Crystal tutorials I had saved, and did a few rounds in Axe, and I was actually less rusty than I expected. On day 80, I tried some novel crystal combinations on a zombie, including using weakness, so I have to break it with my sword instead of my fist, and trying out block anchoring, which is very useful if you get into a hole with somebody. I did some actual crystal duels the next day, but didn't get any even matches. A handful of people never stood a chance, and the rest demolished me. On day 82, I practiced Nezbot PvP for 45 minutes because I had seen that there were frequent tier tests being conducted, unlike in other game modes. These tier tests are the same ones that ranked Stinky Fart 1 in tier 2 for sword, and although they're not directly useful to casual PvPers, they're often used by more competitive players to get an objective perspective on skill level. After fighting my tier tester, they would determine my rank, which would become public information for pretty much forever, so no pressure. I fought my tier tester, but unfortunately the footage didn't render correctly. All you need to know is that I died in every single round of Netbot. Yeah, I can hear you saying 45 minutes definitely wasn't enough time to learn a new game mode.
I still didn't give you permission to talk.
Like, how are you even... But despite not surviving for long, I think my sword practice carried me through the fight. I got placed in the lower half of tier 4, so it might seem weird that I was happy about it, but consider this. The higher the tier, the fewer players get ranked in that tier, meaning that the average player would be way lower than tier 3. In fact, Elmo, the person I need to kill to prove my proficiency in sword, is ranked as a tier 3 sword player, and you better believe he's above average. I spent the rest of day 82 in crystal duels, and I encountered one guy who was pretty toxic, which is unfortunately common in this game mode. He had a slightly higher win percentage than me, and I was in a disadvantaged state almost the whole fight, but I somehow managed to squeeze out the win. Maybe the toxicity just elevated my determination, but doing so brought me more joy than it probably should have. I spent the next day just practicing sword and Nezbot, trying to implement the tips I had gotten from my tier tester, and they seemed to help a good bit. On day 84, I saw that a tester in Axe was available, so I spent a good hour practicing that, along with some Sword, my new favorite game mode if you couldn't tell, to warm up. I was feeling pretty confident from my practice games, but also nervous, which I almost never get from this block game. So yeah, I got low tier 5, which is the lowest you can get. I did get my tier tester down to 1 heart at one point, but unfortunately the rounds I almost won didn't increase my score this time. Despite my losses, I didn't feel like I played terribly. The tester, who themselves was around tier 3, was just a bit too tough for me to squeeze in those few wins. This doesn't bode well for my impending duel with Elmo, but I'll just have to kick my practice into high gear for these last few days, and hope that Sword being my most practiced game mode would count for something. Before I could increase my gameplay time to unhealthy levels though, I decided to take another month-long break to play on a friend's Bedrock realm. I was once again getting a bit tired of going through the same routine every day, and wanted to take a break before the final sprint. Yeah, that sounds good. Definitely has nothing to do with failing my test. No, what? Did you say something? Also, I'm required to remind you, do not subscribe. Go watch one of my shorts first or something. The full videos are mostly trash. Now, I was planning on coming back from my break a few days earlier, but I saw there was a boat course on PvP Legacy, so... You know, I wasn't planning on adding a bonus skill to this video because of how important PvP is in mastering Minecraft, but you just can't deny the allure of staying up until 2 AM, listening to Tokyo Drift and taking these turns at Mach 1. I used my tried and tested strategy of watching a tutorial on YouTube to learn about the meta, and then practiced until I could beat the PvP Legacy boat course in just 47 seconds. I also joined a server dedicated to boat racing, and would occasionally do a few laps on there if I didn't want to PvP right away. Overall, I got better at boat racing than anyone has any right to be for such a comparatively useless skill. That was fun, but I've got to start counting days again, and this time, they're all actually going to be consecutive. No more month-long breaks, okay? I didn't want to skimp out on practice right before the finale, so I made sure to log at least an hour each of those previous days. I would have practiced more on day 90, but I had to update my mods to the latest version, which is always an ordeal, but I still managed to get a good 2 hours of practice in. On day 91, I downloaded a practice map that I had seen online, which was essentially the same as my zombie practice setup, but adjusted using mods to be closer to fighting a real player. I practiced my combos on this for 30 minutes, then switched to sword duels for an hour. I came back to the practice map and changed the settings up a bit, then did Nethpot duels. I like using Nethpot to practice because it's very demanding in terms of aim and critting, which aren't trained as much by repeating sword matches, but are still important skills for winning sword matches. The next day I spent an hour and 45 minutes on the practice map I downloaded, only logging 20 minutes in proper sword matches. I tried Axe again, but the player seemed pretty sweaty, so I quit to fiddle with my settings and did another hour on the practice map. It's strangely addicting because of the lack of rounds, but I want to get better at real duels, so I'll try to tone down how much I'm fighting the NPC from now on. Not today though, I still wanted to warm up with the NPC, then I fought players on Stray until the server started lagging out. I switched back to Axe PvP for another hour and a half, and actually enjoyed it this time, which is nice. The next day was similar, starting with the NPC and 30 minutes of Sword against proper players, but then mixing in some Crystal to kind of emulate my initial plan. I also saw that an Axe tester was available, so I ran Axe duels for an hour before losing all but one of my matches against the tester, earning high tier 5. I wrote in my notes, it's not good, but it's not low tier 5. On day 95, I once again warmed up against the NPC, but for the last time I promise, and decided to try out Diamond Potion PvP because the tester was available. I realized in doing this that my aim with speed was terrible, so I left the testing queue after 20 minutes. I then fought the guy who was evenly matched with me on Stray a few months ago, and I had undeniably improved. I won every round we fought in every game mode, except UHC, which I hadn't practiced at all over the 100 days. This was a good sign, and I was feeling pretty confident in my ability for my duel with Elmo, which was approaching faster than I realized. I ran Crystal duels for 30 minutes, then tried out the Crystal mode on the NPC, which was actually really useful for dialing in my hit Crystal and teaching me how important Pearl Flashing is, which is where you throw an Ender Pearl at the ground to get a split second of invincibility. I saw that Elmo was online then, and we dueled in every game mode that's available on PvP Legacy. I ended up losing 30 rounds of Sword in a row on Stray, albeit by half a heart several times, but never getting a firm kill. I did win a few rounds in the other game modes we fought in, but I didn't really feel like I can count those as victories when they're not in the main game mode of my opponent. I did a bit of crystal versus zombies, then players to round up the day. You might think I failed my goal, but just wait. I'm not about to give up on mastering PvP, and 3 of the most important duels I've had yet are about to occur. I spent day 96 focusing on my crystal PvP, and I logged 2 hours and 45 minutes between fighting players and practicing on the NPC. I also did a good bit of sword, including dueling a player who's just below Elmo in terms of skill, and won a bit less than half my games. And no, this doesn't count as one of the 3 important duels. The next day was like the calm before a storm, with me just fighting normal players in all 3 main game modes for a few hours. This was a nice opportunity to rest, because the next couple days are going to be wild. Trust me. I started day 98 with a typical 80 minutes of sword duels on Stray, but halfway through, I spotted somebody who caught my attention. The creator of one of the first PvP tutorials I watched, Intel Edits, was practicing too at that very moment. I had heard he was ranked to low tier 3, slightly worse than Elmo, but some say he has the skill of a low tier 2 PvPer. Well, I'll let the duel speak for itself. I actually fought Intel twice, but I lost twice. I can't say I'm disappointed though. The duels were fun and he certainly lived up to his reputation. Day 99. 2 days left. I wanted to finish with an even load of practice, so I did about half an hour each of sword, hit crystal practice, crystal, and axe. Lo and behold, as I'm practicing axe, I get matched with another tutorial creator. This time I'm facing off against XD, a contributor to the advanced axe tutorial I had watched and rewatched so many times. This is gonna be a fun one. So no, I didn't win. Once again I fought 2 rounds, this time against XD, and lost both. His skill certainly doesn't disappoint, only my own. But hey, we're not done yet, let's see what happens. I was planning to have some sort of grand final duel on day 100, but I never got it figured out. And looking back at days 98 and 99, maybe I didn't need to. I went about a month without practicing PvP as I tried to figure out how to include a climax when I ran into Elmo on Stray and we did a few rounds of sword. For the first time, I actually won a few matches against the person I had been struggling to beat all this time. It wasn't his best day, and to be fair, Elmo still killed me 3 to 5 times for each of my own kills, but I never would have imagined reaching this bar when I first started this challenge. Actually, that's a lie, I expected it to be so much easier. Well, thanks for watching everyone. This video has been 20 minutes of your time, and 20 months of mine, not even joking. I'm glad to be able to move on to other things though. I can't believe I'm finally done with it. A few other notes. First, all the music in this video was made by myself, and second, I've spent so long editing it that I probably have gotten so rusty that I can't PvP anymore. We'll see. Have a good night.